before it starts to go. It goes every half hour. So we're doing the night over a certain time. I can't remember what the time period is, but over an hour.
Okay. So, Lisa, can you let people in? There's still loads joining. No.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, hi everyone. Thank you for joining. I'll get us started, shall I? I think there's still quite a few joining, so there might be a few interruptions just as we get going. But just to let you know, we've got quite a few parents that can't make it today, so we are recording this call, and the plan is we'll just share the recording later on using On Deck later on in the week. I suspect many of them, like Susan, is on holiday now that the schools have finished up. So if you don't want your faces on the recording, just simply switch your cameras off. So first things first, for those that are new to these calls, just some quick introductions. My name's Chris. I'm one of the parent volunteers at the club, and I'm joined by Lisa, who most of you know. She does an amazing job for us as club secretary. And today's call is really just a chance to introduce you all to Jimmy, our new head coach. Now, Jimmy doesn't start with us until August, but he's kindly given up some of his time today just to start the introduction. So welcome, Jimmy. And may I just say congratulations on your new role, and just I think I can speak on behalf of everyone in the committee. We're just all really pleased to have you on board. So in preparation for this call, Susan has been a very busy bee, and she has asked all of the membership to submit some questions in advance. And I think it's fair to say we have quite a list. Are you ready for them?
Go for it. Go for it.
All right, but before the question, sorry, before we get started, I did forget to say, and Lisa, you did remind me before we started, we are using the chat function on today's session. So if there's any questions that you want to ask, just pop them into the chat and we'll just pick them up as we go. So Lisa, do you want to kick us off and start off with the first question?
Yeah, so I think I'll just start off with, tell us about your career as a head coach so far, Jimmy.
Started coaching at Wren many years ago, and then moved to Western Berkshire, which sounds very familiar, as in right now. Then went to Highland, and then back to Wren, and then back to Western Berkshire. So that's kind of the basics. When I was at Western, we had a bit of success. I'm sure some of you guys remember a boy called Ross Murdoch. There was a few others who went on to Commonwealth Games, and then a few others who won nationally and went on to British and the like. So in terms of success, there's a few successful stories I could probably tell you about, but not to big up too much. Basically, my role has always been to make sure that each kid feels part of the sport. That's kind of where I base myself on. And then from there, running about different programs, trying to make sure that happens. So eventually it lands back here at Western Berkshire, which is quite a nice place to end up again. And basically that's the premise of the whole kind of short-winded story of where I land now. So a lot of different clubs, a lot of different experience, a lot of different stories that I'll no doubt recant over plenty of time. But basically the premise is a bit of success with some athletes that some of you guys will know. Basically, the philosophy is, making sure each kid feels part of the sport, feels, the best authentic version of themselves, and now I've ended up back at Western Berkshire again, excited to go again.
Jimmy, just kind of following on from it, obviously you've very successful and great career in kind of coaching and in the swimming world. So what is it about Western Berkshire that has kind of brought you back full circle again?
I think when you have your first head coach job, it kind of stays with you. And I think it's something that job came up, I think, before in the past. I don't think I was quite ready to sort of move from there and start at Western Berkshire. But now it seems like Wren's in a stable state. It seems to move in the right direction. I think some of you guys may have seen that sort of mini league level or national level. And it's a new challenge. It's something to get excited about. It's in a position where I think we can really build the club on. There's a lot of easy wins, which makes me look a lot better. But there's a lot of situations where I think if we put in the right philosophy, the right culture, the right environment, get the kids a bit more enthused, the parents a bit more enthused, I really think it could go back to the family club kind of where I remember it. Let's say it's not that now, but I think there's a lot of easy wins to get it back to that kind of level, and that's something sounds exciting to be a part of. So that's kind of the crux of the why.
Right, Jimmy, I've got a question for you then. So obviously we've been working with you for a few months now, and you've definitely been watching the club from afar. And I know you've been meeting the committee and the coaching team too, but just based on what you've seen so far, I mean, what do you see as the priorities for you and the team? I don't know, next three to 6 months.
I think my Wi-Fi cuts in and out, so apologies if you lose me or I speed up and go slow. But next 3 to 6 months, I think most of it will be down to the fact of just figuring out where everybody's at. I think a lot of things are solved by conversations. Genuine chat around the simple chats around the pool side has been nobody talks, nobody chats, nobody knows what's going on. So I think that's part and parcel of what needs to be done. It's just figure out where everybody's at. Just figure out where everybody needs to be, what they want the club to look like, where we're falling short in the club being, what's going well, what we can need to improve, and then it's putting an action plan in place to allow that to happen. And I think it can be too quick to sort of make quick changes and everything to happen straight away. But I think there's a lot of people with different things they want to say, and everybody needs to be listened to. And I think that's the first sort of 3 to 6 months plan is sitting down, figuring out what the action plan looks like. There might be a few things we need to change quickly, such as getting information out to coaches, parents, committee of what the plan looks like in my head, and then what direction we're heading in, and then sit down and actually discuss, is that where everybody wants to be? Is there some things we need to change along the way and figure that out? But yeah, quite a lot of it's laying the groundwork of where is everybody and where do we want to be heading.
Yeah, I think that's understandable. I think we'll all be happy with that.
No, I think that's great, Jimmy. So there is another question that's come in from the parents round about meets, and what the question is, will you be encouraging your coaching team to engage with swimmers to direct them on which meets to apply for?
I think meets are an interesting one. Yeah, I think it's very easy to say it lands with coaches, and the coaches chat with all the parents, sit down with all the kids, enter all the meets and put in all the swims, and that's a nice way of doing it. It requires a lot of workload to do that. Is that a short-term solution? No. Is it a long-term solution? Possibly. I think we need to go down the route of actually figuring out where the club lands with the coaching and what they can and can't commit to. So primarily, a lot of the entry process will be presumably landing with me in the first sort of few months, sitting down, figuring out what that process looks like, what's the easiest approach for the parents, what's the easiest approach for the coaches, and then coming up with a solution of that. I think what we want to get to a stage of saying is the coaches select the swims for the athletes, because disrespect to the parents that are on, but the coaches should theoretically know what's best for the athletes. And then we should get kids on a conveyor belt of entry meets. So where that needs to be guesstimates, it's a nice way of putting it, but guesstimate times to get kids into meets, so they get on that conveyor belt of doing meets. Then we need to start that ball rolling. When we need to do time trials, not a fan of them, but get kids up to date times we can look at. But over a longer period of time, yeah, I think that's something that I really want the coaching team to be engaged with and say, such and such in the squad, they're going to enter these races. There's a whole decision on that and a pathway on that, and parents are then kept abreast of what the plan looks like, not necessarily making the decision at front line, because there's a lot of pressure involved with that. That doesn't mean that there's not an option for parents to say, look, we don't want to enter that, or we don't want to go to these meets, or there's too many swims, or it's too little swims. I think a lot of it comes back to communication. But I think over a longer period of time, yeah, the coaches take charge. Over a shorter period of time, it's probably going to land with me, but we need to figure out what that meet process looks like. Because if you're in the A squad and B squad, you've probably done it for years. If you're in the skill squad and the foundation squad, you've probably got no idea what that looks like. So I think it's given everybody the chance of understanding the process and then figuring it out along the way. Long-winded answer, but yeah, probably me short-term, coaches long-term seems like a sensible idea.
Yep, makes sense. And just for all the parents that joined, please remember, if you've got any questions that you want to ask, just pop it into the chat. We've got quite a few to get through, so I'll move us on. You'll know this, Jimmy, because you have been watching the club from afar, but we've recently restructured our whole club. and we're probably about 2 months in now, but do you have any plans to change anything that's been set out by Heather already? I think specifically senior squad. So this question's primarily around goals for those senior squads.
I think it'd be daft to come in and change everything. I think most parents in this chat have probably rearranged their life around some form of swimming. And some people that would be their life to go from pill to post and all the pools. So yeah, nothing to change so far. I think it's really, I presume there's a lot of discussion with parents over what the timetable looked like and what we're trying to do with the timetable and what the purpose of the timetable was. So it's figuring that out and then seeing if it's fit for purpose and saying, well, what small changes can we make? If you're looking at specifically the older squad, goal setting's an easy one. If they've done goal setting, that's great. You pick up the goals and see where they're at. I think it's a review with them to see if those are achievable or they are underneath what they can do. You know, I think some kids may need to be shooting for the stars and, you know, land them onto whatever it is, whatever the phrase is. I'm sure I get that wrong, but aiming high, and I think sometimes we need to sit down with them and say, well, if you're only aiming here and you can do here, then what's the gap? In terms of, you know, each individual, I do tend to spend a lot of time with each individual. I understand my primarily my first year will be working with the older squads, so it's getting to know them, getting to know what makes them tick, and then figuring out from there if we can do better than what they've set. It's a lovely place to be. Sometimes it may be a situation of them aiming too high and having that conversation of where we're within reason trying to go. In terms of the macro scale of the club, like to change the club overnight would be daft. I'd probably the most hated person walks through the door. So keep it as is, chat to parents, figure out what we need to make small changes of before we make radical changes, because radical changes create a lot of hassle. As I'm sure you guys are aware of the committee, that, you know, there will be a lot of people going, oh God, this has changed my whole upside down. So happy to have conversations, figure out what works, what doesn't work. It probably won't work for everybody, but at least we can have that consensus to go with what works and how can we make small changes to make big differences, and that's all we're trying to do.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, one of the follow-ups to that, one of the specific questions just on the senior squads was poolside helping. That's something Heather started to get going. What's your thoughts on maintaining that or growing it?
We at the moment at Ren 96 have 40 poolside helpers in any given week. Granted, it's a bigger club, but that's 20% of our programme that are in deck poolside helping. I get that most of them are probably not kids either. Some of them are parents. So, hey, the membership's on. Anybody wants to get in poolside and help on poolside, happy to take anybody on who wants to help. And more often than not, it's fixing goggles and filling juice bottles up. It's nothing too flash, but it makes the coach's job a lot easier. In terms of younger athletes or the older athletes in the program want to poolside help, anything that gets them engaged with the program, anything that gives them a desire to be part, anything that gives them something back to the kids has got to be a good thing. It's got to reaffirm the idea of a family club. If you've got some of the senior athletes who go off to nationals one week and they're coming back and working with the mini league kids next week, there's just a connection there, and it allows the younger kids to aspire to be one day as good as them. So I don't see anything wrong with it. It's the idea of what development looks like. Is it putting them on poolside and hoping they can coach kids, or is it actually giving them the tools to empower younger kids and empower themselves? And I think that's something that we need to be acutely aware of, that having poolside helpers is great, but spending the time with them to make them better. Luckily enough, I've done a lot of this mentoring through my career, which is always fun to do. So yeah, I think that's something we need to aspire to, hopefully have kids that come back into it, and down the line, hopefully have future coaches. I think most of the coaches we have, if not all the coaches we have swam with Western Bartonshire at one stage. So that's got to be a good thing. So let's figure how we do that again. That'd be a good idea.
Fab, Jimmy. That's great. I think one of the questions has come in about long course training. So obviously we're still in long course season. We had a lot of swimmers that probably first swam their long course pool this year. So the question is, with a view to long course season starting in January coming up, is there a plan to try and get some long course training in place?
I think it's well established that training long course is a bit of placebo. I don't think it makes a difference. That's not to say it doesn't work as a placebo. It's just a bit of a placebo. Granted, a lot of kids will see all other clubs doing long course and think they're missing out as well. So, you know, I'm not against long course. I don't think it makes a massive difference, but I think in terms of kids to get their heads right, they probably need to be doing some sort of long course training. It's probably a good place to start from. Do we try to get as many long course sessions as we can? I think that's a waste of time. Do we use long course sessions instead of current sessions? Again, probably a waste of time. So it should be something that adds to the program, create something that we could do with. So if I've got our sessions a week and the kids are attending those sessions a week and need further training, then I'd see long courses being a great tool to add on to and make them better, both from a placebo point of view and additional training point of view. Is it something that we could do a bit differently? Could we look at doing fancier and funner ways of doing it, i.e. going to meets abroad or down south and adding training into that? I think that's a far better way of building team ethos, building team environment, building experience for the kids than let's all plod along to Stirling and travel for an hour and a half there, an hour and a half back, and we've done long course. So I think it's managing that. Probably sitting on the fence with a lot of that there, but I don't think long course makes a difference. But I understand for kids of certain ages and stages that they think long course will. And sometimes you just need to listen to them in that fact and actually just pay attention to what they want and maybe give them something along those lines. So I think September's when all the long course stuff comes out. So have a chat with what the budget looks like and then see what's available and move forward from that.
That's fab, Jimmy. Thank you.
I'll do the next question, and thank you to whoever submitted it because this is on my mind as well. But yeah, the question then, will there be a detailed meets timetable or program now, as much as practical, right? Because obviously plans can change. But ideally, if we could have a calendar of activities, meets well in advance of the short course season. And this parent is just saying over the last couple of years, because we've not had that, it's made forward planning really difficult. Is that so? What's your thoughts on having something like that for the year?
I think it makes sense. And I don't think it starts and ends with meets. I think it's also team activities, what the club gets up to, SASA renewals. And if you're fairly new to swimming, you wouldn't know what SASA renewals mean. So I think stuff like that, having that always one big calendar that people can access kind of makes sense. Obviously, we've had COVID the last couple of years. So it's been really hard, 2 years previous, it's been really hard for clubs to kind of get ahead of stuff. Will there be a meet on in February that looks like a districts or North Ayrshire meet or this? Sat down with the coaching team. We are looking to produce one by the end of this month, which is Friday. I need to go over it, just check that the meets are appropriate for the certain ages. Ideally, I would like to have something published by the first time I'm in the door, which is the 1st of August. You can hold me to that. You can shout and ball at me at that if it's not there by the 1st of August, but that's the plan.
Right.
Will it have everything? Will it have the squads exactly right? I don't know, because if March comes around and that meet is not there in March that was there before, then I can't help that. But I think there's a part in that we want to get many people on side so they know what they're doing, and also the purpose of why. And then from background of that is actually sitting down with you guys as a committee, you guys as parents, and saying, well, we need to have social events. We need to have times where the kids get together away from the pool and pencil them in. And sometimes that might be instead of a competition, because I think some kids just want to be with their mates. And as lovely as it is sitting in a hot, sweaty poolside for 6 hours, I don't think it's the same as a social get together. Might be, but I don't think it's the same for parents. So I think it's definitely something we need to plan ahead of time and get ahead of and say, right, let's get that sent out by the 1st of August. It may not be accurate, but at least it gives you guys an idea of what's coming up. Year upon year upon year, the more I get used to the club, then the better it should get, he says confidently. But at the start, I spoke to the coach and said, what do you usually do? Let's get that out there, let's stick to that. And then from there, we can kind of work from it. But the accuracy of year 1, hopefully, will be better by year 3. But you can hold me to that and shout and ball at me if I don't get it right. But I think that's probably the best approach. I think that makes sense to everybody.
Yeah, I think getting a draft out there is a good start for sure. So no, I think most people will welcome that. So thank you for that.
Fab, Jimmy. The next question is, it's round about distance training. So obviously the club historically was split into sprint and distance. Now we've kind of amalgamated them where we've just got squads. So the question is, are there any plans to bring back distance training?
We train kids to the best of their ability. I think that sounds like a sensible approach. So if you've got kids aspiring to be distance swimmers, then it seems a bit daft to say, no, we're not going to do that. If you've got kids aspiring to sprint swimmers, then it seems daft to say, no, we're not going to do that. I think there's some principles, some basic principles. We need to get kids to swim properly, technically well. for both injury prevention as well as long-termness in the sport. So that comes first. Technique comes first, and then it's the ability to do skills right, like diving and turns, and to a degree of applying speed, because they've got to actually move through the water efficiently and effectively, as well as diving and turns. So naturally that happens, and there's a degree of saying, well, how long do you need to hold that for in a race? And that for some people that might be 15 minutes for 1500, so some maybe 20 minutes for 1500. So there's a few guys that might not be 15 minutes. That might be an aspiration. But there may be some guys out there that say 5K and 10K, and having the joy of working with 10K open water Scottish champions and a few guys going to the British this year for open water. We may have kids in the programme that do that. And then there may be some of the masters who knows that want to do Ironman and crazy stuff after that. They need to have an aerobic base. You try your best to coach a person in front of you, whether that is distance training, sprint training, technique training, conversational training, poolside helper training. There's a number of things, but the concept of just distance training is a bit specific. I think the idea is you treat the kid in front of you, you give them the basics, and then you work with them on where they want to go, and hopefully over time they reach that goal. And that may change as well. That's the joy of dealing with kids. There's 1 minute we want to do something, next minute we want to do something else. Yeah, we work with the kid in front of us. So distance training sounds like a good idea. Battling kids up and down the pool sounds like a good idea. I don't get to talk to them as much. But there's parts of that where you have to say, well, maybe for them, that's not what they need. They need to do this. And then you try to manage the squad as effectively as you can. But I think it comes down to the individual athlete rather than necessarily the philosophy of the coach. Having been flawed in that on both sides, yeah, I think it's sitting down with the athlete and saying, let's get them to their goals or whatever training they need. And sometimes that might need that a squad has to do 4 different sets or 5 different sets or 6 different sets. Well, 5 lanes doing 6 different sets might be complicated, but we'll try. And I think that's all anybody can be asked of as a coach, is try to make them the best they can be.
Yeah, fab, Jimmy. Thank you. So another question that's come in from a parent. We're nearly at the end, so just a wee reminder, if anyone's got any other questions, you could raise your hand, because I think we've got a wee bit of time, or stick it in the chat. But the next parent question that gets sent in the now was, for older swimmers who are competing, do we have the right balance between pool time and strength training?
Oh, strength training. I'm a great fan of strength training. I think it comes back to the previous question, not to cop out of it at the end, but it's sitting down with what kids need. I tend to find, and I know that sounds really sexist, but I tend to find that boys like to lift things and girls like to do more aerobic stuff. That's changing over time in the last 10 years. So we will have some kids, girls who want to lift stuff and boys who want to swim more. It's figuring out what their needs is and what their stimulus is. I've had an athlete in the past who's made Commonwealth Games on the back of doing 3 pool sessions a week. That's been successful for them. Equally so, I have an athlete that just almost made the Commonwealth Games on 10 sessions a week. Now, one would say, well, that worked for that person, that worked for the other. The person doing 3 sessions did a lot of gym stuff. Do I think gym stuff is needed? Yeah. I think we need to be looking at how we create a land training program effectively, not just using a foam roller and rolling it back and forth for a while. I think there has to be something that's functional, that says this is what we need to do, this is where their strengths and weaknesses are, much like in swimming. I think there's got to be an acceptance that when they're young, it's probably not as effective to do land training as it is to do swimming stuff, but as they age, we want to have a well-rounded, balanced kid. And I think if they do a lot of swimming, especially a lot of front crawl swimming, you can imagine what shoulder injuries and back injuries they may end up with doing the same stroke, and persistent injuries. So it's the idea of actually creating a well-rounded, balanced kid. And maybe that's not just strength, maybe it's yoga, maybe it's Pilates, maybe it's just conditioning and areas like that we need to look at. But there's a whole number of things you can add to a program. It's what works and what's effective for the kids in front of you. And without fully understanding the group in front of me, it's hard to say, next week they're going to lift really big weights and they're going to be really, really fast. Love that to be the pace. Don't get me wrong, I'd love kids to be in the gym and less swimming, but some kids will need different stimulus. And as long as people accept that, as long as it's not the idea of, that kid over there gets to lift big weights and I don't, well, your goals are different. Kid gets an injury, you put a plaster on them, you don't put a plaster on everybody. So I think that's basically what we're trying to do is figure out what's best for each individual, especially at the upper end. The lower end, we can be a bit more generic and give them some fun stuff that's, aerobically conditioning kind of stuff as they move through. The strength element of things, the power element of things is more specific to the individual.
Well, that's fab, Jimmy. So the next question that's come in, looks like it's came from a parent whose child's maybe not reached the meet stage yet. So the question is, how would you go about encouraging our swimmers to compete, especially if they have not yet entered the meet?
Don't
What's
do
your-
it. Don't
what's
do
your
it.
driver?
Don't do it. Don't do it. You spend 8 hours in poolside. Don't do it. I'm telling you now. Yeah, I think it comes back to the individual. At Wren, we've got 260 athletes in the program. I'm sure there's about 210 athletes that compete on a regular basis. I do not hound the 50 people that don't, because for them, they've got their own individual reasons for doing that. Do we have kids in the program at Western Bartonshire that want to do competitions and are absolutely petrified of standing out at poolside and diving in? We can solve that by teaching them how to dive. Do we have kids out there that are absolutely petrified of swimming against somebody? Well, we can solve that by developing. So it's really the needs of the individual. What do they want to do? And if you want to get down that route of competitions, it's having those conversations, having those positive conversations, putting them in a space where they're comfortable and saying, you know, I had a great story yesterday with a parent that was talking about a kid who did their first time trial and loved it. Absolutely petrified, but did the first time trial. And after that was like, I'm hooked. Pity the parent that has to do now all the competitions, but the kid's hooked. And I think that's something we need to lean into is how do we create an environment that kids go, I love this sport. That might not be through competitions. It might not be through the idea of, you know, training every single session. It might be through the idea, 1 to 2 sessions a week. I want to be with my mates and I want to swim really well. I'm not going to sit there and say, enter meets a year, you're gone. Because that's good. That's good that kids want to be part of the sport. I think there's another part of it where we go, could we get kids to do more competitions if they want to and make them feel space and find them in a space where they're comfortable and happy? Aye, like that's what we should be trying to do, but we shouldn't be doing it at the unwant of the kids to go, oh, I hate this. Well, let's find them a space where they're comfortable. So I think it comes back to the individual and having those conversations. And that's maybe lands at the coach's door, which then lands at my door, is how do we get kids comfortable with being part of the sport in their space, which may or may not be competitions. It may or may not be competition for the parents, and that needs to be a conversation with the parent, and that's just figuring all that out. But aye, if you're going to spend 8 hours at competition, there's nothing better. I take it all back. There's nothing better. Every parent will tell you, it's the joy of their life. But if the kids feel happy and comfortable and want to do it, then let's support them. I think that's the key.
Fab. Thanks, Jimmy. The last question that we've got, probably already covered this, but it was, will you recommend swims for swimmers to compete in? It's totally down to parents and the swimmers right now. I think we've covered that in a previous question anyway.
Whatever the first session of the first day is, everybody will enter that no more, and that means they can all head up the road. I think that sounds like a good approach. No, I think it comes down to what the individual needs. At the younger age, I mean, if you want a basic script of it, the younger age, kids should be doing a mixture of events, some that they're good at, some that they're not good at. And I know that's very scary for kids to do. I am rubbish at breaststroke. I don't want to do breaststroke. Just give it a shot, because we all start somewhere. I hate to say breaststroke, but it tends to be breaststroke. As they move through, you want to have a mixture of all events, all races, all scripts. So you find kids doing 400 IM, 1500 front crawl, 50 front crawl, 50 breaststroke, all the range of things, so kids get exposure to all the meets, all the races. And then as they start to get a little bit older, 13, 14, 15, we start to specialise in what they're probably more suited to. That doesn't mean that we don't sit down and say, this is a weaker event, go try something new, get out of your comfort zone. Everything has to have a purpose, but you have to then sit down with the individual and figure out what that purpose is. I'm not going to lie, if your foundation and skills, chances are we'll enter you for every single event that we feel is suitable. There won't be a kind of specificity to it. As you get older, there might be, and that will probably just be stuff that we think is beneficial. And that may end up being a lot of angry kids. As long as you guys can support me in that and say, there's a reason that guy's put you in for it, then that's good. But I think there's points where we have to actually give kids an exposure of stuff that they're not so good at, so they learn how to deal with setbacks, they learn how to deal with being uncomfortable, because it won't just help them in the pool, it will help them in life in general. And if they come out of that and feel challenged, then that's a good place to be. But yes, chances are the coaches will take responsibility of that, hopefully, over time. And they're not at a stage yet, but it's definitely over time. So
All right, Jimmy, you've made it through all the questions, the grilling. So we're not quite Piers Morgan, but we gave it a go between Lisa and I asking you questions.
Good.
And I see you put your email address on the chat function.
Yes, somewhere, wherever it is. So if anybody wants to email me, that is my new email address. I understand that I've not officially head coach yet, so I'll go with it. If you've got any questions, issues, problems, queries, all the rest of it. At the moment, currently, I don't have a huge amount of time to spend on it, but if it's there, I will respond at some point. So yeah, if you want to send anything through, especially in August when I arrive, I try to get back within 36 hours. That's the plan, unless it's a weekend and I'm busy at the weekend. Love to hear from you guys, but busy at the weekend, I'll try to get back to you the Monday. That's just how I work. Hopefully everybody can respect that enough. And that's not to say that don't do meets, but dealing with emails, that's a Monday job rather than a Saturday, Sunday job. So the email's there and it will just sit there. Ideally, I'd like to get back to you, but at the moment, I'm fairly stacked to Ren, handover notes and all the rest of it, but I'll try and get back to you as soon as I can. As of August, it'll be about 36 to 48 hours, but usually 36 hours.
That's great, Jimmy. Thank you. Very kind of you. And just thanks again for today. Appreciate you're a busy man. You've got a squad there in that pool ready to be coached. So just thank you on behalf of the committee and the parents that have joined. Just really appreciate your time. And I think we're all looking forward to you starting in August.
Yeah.
So we'll wrap it up there.
Excellent.
Thank you, guys. Thanks for joining, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.